gacha games will eventually come to an end one day. The server shuts down, and everything that you spend in the game, be it your money, time, energy, and even love, will no longer be accessible to you. We have seen many gacha games ended their service throughout the years. But then comes the question, when will big gacha games like the one made by Hoyoverse will end? Will we lose all our waifu and husbando when the time comes? So, let's discuss about it. Welcome back to another Honkai Star Rail discussion video, gamers. In this video, we're going to talk a little bit about a gloomy topic, and I'm really curious on what the opinions of Honkai Star Rail fanbase are, and maybe even gacha games fans in general, regarding the lifespan of live service games. To give a little bit of background, why I'm asking this out of the blue and why I'm making this video. So this topic came to me as I was listening to a Pirate Software video about gaming law in UK, if I'm not mistaken. And currently, there are some people who are demanding for a law that all online and maybe even live service games should still be accessible to users after the end of their service. That immediately comes to all my gacha games that I've been playing. Will I lose all my progress? Will I never be able to take a look at all my characters when the server shuts down, even for big companies? So shortly after, I made a community vote asking about how long do people think Honkai Star Rail will last. And the results, to my surprise, it was actually more realistic than I thought. At the time of making this video, there are about 2,100 votes in, and about 66% of the people, which is almost 1,400 people, voted for 10 years of service. And honestly, that is pretty reasonable. And we are going to discuss about it in this particular video. But before we start to the main topic of the discussion, just a quick disclaimer, I'm not a game designer or work in a video game industry. I'm someone who is learning about them from the outside as a consumer, so I can understand the product that I'm using a bit better day by day. Because of that, we are going to do some service level analysis from my limited knowledge about game industry and a bit of game design. And of course, especially those who are in the know more about this particular topic, I will need your insight on the matter as well. So do please leave a comment in the video so that we can learn together about video game design, and at the very least, be more aware about them and how they could evolve. Also, at the end of the video, I'm going to read some comments from the community poll and see what they are thinking when they choose to vote a specific option. If you want to be featured in my future video, the next time I make a community poll, do vote and leave a comment on it. But of course, don't forget to subscribe so that you don't miss the poll. Sorry for yapping, let's just get into it. So we're going to take a look at the voting results and then analyze how likely any of these scenarios are. The first option that I gave is 5 years. There are only about 8% of the people choose their option at the time of recording. It makes sense why the percent is low, because I also think that it's very unlikely for this to happen, for Honkai Star Rail to cease their service just within 5 years. Why am I confident in saying that? First, we are approaching the second year of Star Rail, and we can see that the story of Star Rail is far from over. In fact, it was just the beginning. From my understanding of the story so far, the final boss of the current saga will probably be Nanook, and we're gathering allies from places that we visit, so that one day we will have fighting chance against Nanook. And with every update, we keep introducing more characters and then expanding more on the factions that has been established very early in the base game, in the first update through Simulated Universe. And if every major and minor update we are progressing through the main plot, sure, we might see the ending in 5 years. But no, we have subplots as well, which includes the Xianzhou arc and also possibly IPC related plots. It is going to take a while to wrap everything within 5 years, and each of the places that we visited have some kind of continuation story, like what happened to Belobog on version 1 and how it was involved and introduced to IPC. And with the current one in Penacony, we were introduced more to another faction such as the Galaxy Ranger, and also a possibly introduction to another antagonist, Dr. Primitive. So yeah, we keep expanding on every single update. So there is a lot to cover. Heck, Genshin is 4 years old at this point. We are still in Natlan right now. Next year, we're most likely going to have Shnesnaya, and the year after that most likely will be Kanria, if you're following the first few trailers that they released, which could be the final year for this saga, which everything ends at Kanria. Or it might take another year after that to wrap everything up, maybe a secret area that exists in another dimension to wrap the current saga, maybe like the Abyss. So if I'm going by this speculation, Genshin will take 6 to 7 years to wrap up its first saga story, and Genshin is pretty clear on how many nations we will visit. On the other hand, Star Rail is a space travel. There's no limit to places that we can go. There could be hundreds or even thousands of places that they can go. The devs can make it as long as they want when it comes to wrapping the first saga of the story. That's the analysis through story perspective. So not within 5 years, this game has a long way to go when it comes to concluding the story. But if you take a look realistically from a business perspective, if you take a look as a live service game, currently Honkai Star Rail often occupies the top chart of gacha revenue. So as now the game is very profitable, and there's not much reason for the company to terminate the game's service when they can still make so much more money. But then again, gaming industry is very unpredictable. Anything can happen. So unless a certain game catch the gacha genre by storm and becomes super popular, and that causing HSR to lose many of its player base, or a new trend in video games change, I don't know what that is, but it could happen. Most likely the game will not end its service in just within 5 years. So at least we're happy about that, right? Our beloved Honkai Star Rail will still have a lot to show for us. So 5 years, very unlikely. The second option, 10 years. Honestly, I'm very surprised that 66% of the people actually believe that Star Rail will actually conclude its service around 10 years. I was expecting more people to actually vote between 15 years or even the 20 plus years. But I think this is mostly will be correct. To be honest, this is the most realistic lifespan from perspective of most players and also from game development perspective. The first main saga of the story should have been done at this point, and if the company decides to end the service, this is probably a good place to do that. But if it's still not finished, oh boy, the devs sure really are stretching the first saga out. Just how big of an army do we need in order to defeat Nanook and his lackeys? How many planets do we need to visit if that's the case? But anything could happen with Honkai Star Rail once again. Even Honkai Impact takes about how long? 6 to 7 years, I think? Correct me if I'm wrong. And now they're moving to second saga, which is a good place to see if people are still interested to see what's next for Honkai Impact story, even though they introduced a bunch of new characters into it. But for loyal fans, they always want to see more of Honkai Impact, right? For HSR, since the scale of the lore being set up is so massive, I expect 10 years sounds like a good amount of time to actually conclude everything that they have been setting up. It can take even longer, depending on how much they going away and adding more subplots into the story. On top of that, maintaining a game for 10 years while consistently keeping the player base to play is a very difficult task for gacha games. For instance, FGO is almost 10 years at this point, and you can see the content drought that the game kinda experiencing. But at the very least, they consistently providing the users with amazing character design and also very good and satisfying story. Since the release of FGO, so many other turn-based games have been released for almost 10 years. Like Honkai Star Rail, Reverse 1999, and many more similar games, and many player base have left FGO, including myself. For me personally, I'm so tired of FGO gacha system, even though I love the story and characters of that game. But I found that the more recent gacha game is much more forgiving with your gacha thanks to the pity system. Because with guaranteed pity, at least you can plan your pools around characters that you want. So those who have played FGO for all this time, we can see that maintaining a game for 10 years will be pretty difficult, especially on keeping the player base around. Not to mention, the developers might not want to work on the same game for 10 years. Also, they need to keep up with ever-changing game industry with ever-changing standards. But now, if we try to take a look from, once again, company perspective, if the number of players are still from large to medium amount compared to its peak, and it still produce a decent amount of profit even though not as large as it used to be, this is also a good time to check the waters, whether people are still interested in the continuity of the story. Maybe by producing a continuation, and this is also the perfect time to perform a game overhaul, like what Honkai Impact 3 did, so they could catch up with the quote-unquote more modern games in terms of graphics, character design, character models, visual effects, level designs, and many more. And that could be the refresher that the series needs so they can attract more players to try and play Honkai Star Rail. But if the amount of profit is generated is so much lower compared to the production costs, I can see that Honkai Star Rail might be terminating their service by the 10-year marks. Hence, 10 years is pretty reasonable lifespan for a gacha game, especially from Hoyoverse. Many gacha games doesn't even survive the first 5 years. But also, the 10 years will be a turning point to see whether it is worth to continue the game or not. And of course, by then, I'm sure Hoyoverse already cooked more than 5 new games to be played, and hopefully their own games are not ended up cannibalizing each other. So yeah, 66% in 10 years, pretty reasonable guess. The third option, 15 years. Only 9% of the people voted for this option. This number also makes sense. For most players, they cannot imagine themselves keep playing the same game for over 15 years. They either move on to new games or just stop playing video game entirely because their time is being used somewhere else more precious, maybe with family for instance. I'm currently at my late 20s, don't have families yet, so I can spend time playing video games, but in 10 to 15 years, things might change for me, right? So for people like me, Star Rail devs really need to keep making sure that they're able to keep the current player base around, or alternatively, they need to find a way to keep attracting new players into their game. Which is why 15 years is not that realistic, but it's still quite possible. But story-wise, this feels like we are reading or following a shonen manga territory like Naruto and Bleach, if they can last this long for one saga. Not just that, this will also be within the territory of Final Fantasy XIV, one of the most popular MMORPG that currently being played by many people. And that game still has a lot of players and they're continuously getting updates. And sometimes they even still attract new players to keep playing the game, which is very interesting study case to do. For Honkai Star Rail case though, that only means that it really takes that much time to explore everything that they have set up since the beginning. Like the factions, getting more gazes from the Ions, meeting more people from IPC outside the 10 Stone Hearts, and maybe even unveiling the IPC motives and even Clivehold's objectives, visiting many different planets, finishing up Xianzhu subplot by then, maybe even earlier, and maybe even going to the second subplot, many different things to consider. In a way, the way they set things up kind of reminds me of Trail series, which is also pretty much, almost 20 years right now. And that series is still one of the best series when it comes to world building. And I can see that Honkai Star Rail takes a lot of inspiration from Trails of series with how they're setting up so many different things for a very large story saga. I reckon at this point, the current developers who are working in Honkai Star Rail will already move on to different projects and maybe even retired, and HSR might be on the hands of the new generation of game developers. So the quality might change. But then it comes a question, how many playable characters are there at this point? The power creep is going to be insane, and also will they keep inventing and expanding their combat mechanics? Will they add more paths and more elements? Will they allow swapping characters mid-battle? Because by this point, we have crazy amount of characters, don't you think? This kind of question needs to be asked since players would want to see the evolution in a gameplay when it comes to their gacha games. They don't want to just keep experiencing the same thing for many years. So that's from story and gameplay perspective. There's a lot to consider. It really depends on how they're handling the stories and gameplay within 15 years to keep people interested. But from company perspective, I don't know how much more Hoyoverse will grow. Currently, they're a multi-billion company. If they have that much amount of reserve funds to be used to maintain their games and even creating new games, I think it's still quite reasonable to see Honkai Star Rail to last this long. Right now, Honkai Impact is still being maintained through the revenue of their many different games. And imagine right now, Honkai Impact does still provide profit, even though by a much smaller margin. But the company is still keeping the game afloat. And that could be Honkai Star Rail in many different years in the future. So 15 years of game lifespan is pretty crazy and pretty difficult to imagine from player perspective, game design perspective, and even company perspective. But story-wise, I think it's still quite reasonable for us to have a saga within 10 to 15 years. Because once again, it's a space journey, it has infinite possibilities. So it is still within a realistic scenario, and I personally think that Star Rail lifespan will be around 10 to 15 years. And the fourth option is 20 plus years. It's being chosen by 18% of the people. Honestly, I think this is the most optimistic option to be chosen by those who really love Honkai Star Rail, it seems. Honestly speaking though, if the game managed to last over 15 years and there's still strong player base and interest, the game can last forever as the settings of space fantasy, once again, has infinite potential. So 20 plus years is still within the realm of possibilities, but how likely they are, it's hard to say. For me right now, it's very unlikely since we're still not even 2 years into the game. So it's very far in the future. This game can last forever as the setting of space fantasy has infinite potential, and they can just keep going as long as the developers don't run out of ideas. So technically speaking, it is still possible for HSR to last over 20 years. There's a precedent of game being maintained for over 20 years, which is called World of Warcraft. And the game still has very decent, strong player base, about 200,000 player base or something like that. So it's not an impossibility for Honkai Star Rail either to last for 20 years plus. But there's always one way for Honkai Star Rail to keep extending their lifespan is by making collaboration, like how Honkai Star Rail is planning to have a Fate collab. That alone can make a game last for 2 to 3 minor updates, which is about 4 to 5 months, without actually touching much of the main story. So that is a pretty good way to actually extend the game lifespan. And other than that, collab will also be the perfect opportunity to gain boost of revenue as well and attracting customers from different games. However, by this point, Honkai Star Rail, Genshin, Zenless Zone Zero, and Honkai Impact most likely will not be the main source of revenue for Hoyoverse, as by 20 years, I have no idea how many games they have released. And if they don't provide enough revenue, the game can be terminated at any point. But for me personally, I can see myself still playing this game 20 plus years later, assuming that they're consistently updating their combat, character model, level design, and many other things. Because I'm a big fan of turn-based game. I've been playing that since I was a kid. So I'm still willing to play Honkai Star Rail for the next 20 years. As Honkai Star Rail fans that loves the world and character a lot, I hope this game lasts as long as possible and it can conclude its story properly. So 20 years, very unlikely, but it is still within the realm of possibilities. So from all of these options, realistically, 10 years seems like the good amount of time. And also the perfect time to test whether is it good for the story to continue or just ends it when they're finished with the first saga. Before we go to the conclusion, let's take a look at some of the comments in the community poll that did give me some ideas and inspiration for this video. I've selected a few and let's take a look at them. The first one, Unending Void says, 10 to 12 years is my expectation, which is honestly already very long. I just think that there's really a lot they can do with Star Rail. Hell, even if Star Rail meets its end, they could make a continuation of it. Sequel, expansion. Turn-based game is a timeless genre, and the kind of sci-fi fantasy mixed with the paths and factions and scale they have created, and the lore has endless possibility. I look forward to see all they can do. So yeah, Unending Void, your thought was exactly like mine. When I was reading this comment, I was like, so I'm not the only one who thinks this way. Honkai Star Rail potential is insane. It's the matters whether they can execute and make use of this potential as much as possible. Which right now, they're doing a decent job, but they haven't drawn the best out of it in my opinion. Which is why I made the video of discussing the untapped potential of Honkai Star Rail. For those who haven't seen it, I really suggest you to actually check it out. The second comments that I picked, Ascaron137 said, hard to say, but HSR lore will outlast the game by a lot, I think. Not even a part 2 or HSR2 thing, even another whole genre of game could be made. The setting is much more open than Honkai Impact 3rd or Genshin because far away planets and factions could exist more or less independent of the main story. Also, it's a gacha game, so it will be kept alive past its true expiration date. Yeah, when I read these comments, it really connects the dot of how Hoyoverse might operate moving forward in the future. If the game has enough player base that is interested to see the continuation, they will make a part 2 for it, that's for sure. And just like you said, gacha game expiration date is very relative. It really depends on the market and whether they can consistently putting enough revenue to cover the production costs while also have enough profit for the company to grow. Meanwhile, let's take a look at comment with differing opinions, which is a very good food for thoughts to consider. Fatum8573 said, 10 plus more years means Hoyo will be at least 10 years plus top-rate company. Don't believe people will be playing gacha games so long. That is a valid concern, and it could happen that people just lose interest in gacha games, or could be there's another trend in video games or the new hot thing for mobile in live service game. So your concern is very valid, but right now, as long Hoyoverse doesn't mess up with what they currently have and keep producing good quality games and also being innovative and trying many new different things and also listening to their customers, it is possible for Hoyoverse to be continuously to be the top 10 years top-rate company. So what you said is still within realm of possibility, and also the opposite can also be true. But thank you for your comment, it is very worth discussing. Alright, that's all the comments I picked for this video. There were some other comments that made really some nice points, but I can't read them all, and I don't want to waste more of your time with me yapping. So feel free to take a look at my original poll to see the rest of them. Regardless, I thank you all for commenting in the poll, as your opinion really helps making this video to have a lot more things to discuss, and you're able to see things from many different perspectives. So, I've yapped for so long. Let me just conclude for those who are kind of forget of things that have been yapping. Realistically speaking, 10 years is the most reasonable lifespan for Honkai Star Rail, and if the devs can push it, maybe at most 15 years of service. But all of us always wants our favorite series to last forever, right? So if you want Honkai Star to last as long as possible, to reach that 20 plus year lifespan, keep playing the game, occasionally spend on characters you want, but please don't spend too much money. Your life is more important and it's very uncertain how the economy of the world will move forward. Also provide them with constructive feedback so that Hoyoverse can make a better game that is loved by many people. And also we need to consider that many of us probably will be in different place to where we are right now, and many of us Honkai Star Rail fans will be at our 30s to maybe even mid 40s. I wonder if many of us are still playing video games by then. So for those who are watching this in many years in the future, as long as Honkai Star Rail dev is still showing respect to the players, do continue to support them, play occasionally, and introduce the game to many future young generations. But for me, there's one thing I would like to ask from all of you to leave a suggestion in the feedback form at the end of every update. So when the game lifespan ends, as a live service, ask the devs to make the game to be an offline game so that we can always play the game in the future, and also so that the future generation can experience the Honkai Star Rail experience as its entirety. Otherwise, this game will be lost to time. I'm not sure if there is any live service full online game becoming available offline at this point. Anyone knows, do let me know. But hopefully, one of the many gacha companies can figure it out. Because if possible, we don't want Honkai Star Rail can only be played through a community-run server, like many very old MMORPG games. So if you remember, do leave that in the feedback form every update. As long as I discuss about this topic, I'm terribly sorry for the messy argument. I'm writing it as best as I can with my limited amount of time while dealing with my day job. So this is the best that I can make right now because I want to discuss this topic as soon as possible. If there's anything you would like to tell everyone about this topic, do leave a comment so that we can learn together. On top of that, do leave a like so that we can spread the awareness about game design, especially about game lifespan more. And I have a couple of discussion video I would like to make, so stay tuned by subscribing to my channel. The next video, stay sharp gamers.
Oh, and don't forget to like and subscribe!